Hi, I'm Bill Kristol. Welcome to Conversations. Very pleased to be joined today again for a third conversation. We do one a year, I guess, with Joe Trippi, the veteran Democratic strategist, a thoughtful Democratic strategist who's been involved in a range of campaigns, Howard Dean's presidential campaign, Doug Jones's Alabama Senate campaigns, and many in between, and has thought, I think, more deeply than your average strategist about for the parties and their situation and the challenges that we now face. And I would say, just to prove this, that Joe in 2019, what was that, in March of 2019, was predicted with pretty high degree of confidence, I think, that Joe Biden was the most likely Democratic nominee in 2020, when that was not the conventional view among Washington sophisticated types. And then in mid-2020, when we did our second conversation, you were, I'd say, more cautious about the Democratic prospects than a lot of people at the time, more worried that we might have a narrower victory rather than a bigger one, and that turned out to be the case, certainly down ticket. So, Joe, thanks for joining me again today.
It's always good to be with you, Bill, and I do enjoy our annual conversations.
Yeah. So, well, now I have to explain. Well, where do we stand? We're 8 months into the Biden administration. I think we're talking here on September 20th, so exactly 8 months, which is, if my math is correct, 1/6 of the way through the Biden administration. So it's not nothing, right? We really have So how's he doing? How's the Democratic Party doing? Just beyond the day to day and week to week kind of headlines. Where do you think things stand compared to what you expected or what one might otherwise expected? And stipulating that some of this isn't things he could have controlled, the Delta variant and whatever. But that's politics, right? You deal with what gets thrown at you. So where do we stand? Where do we stand 8 months in?
A lot of good things happen that you get credit for, and a lot of bad things happen. May not be your fault, but you're going to take the hit for it. He certainly has been in the last month and a half at least. I think a lot of it, well, first of all, where we stand, his approval ratings have clearly taken a hit. I think they're probably at a floor. I think, we see a lot of these measurements about, looking at all the presidents, modern presidents, where does he stand? And I don't think that's likely to be a good measuring post. I think the reality is we're so polarized that where he is now may very well be his floor, and where he was a month or two ago, no matter how well he succeeds, is probably going to be his ceiling. I don't think people's opinions of Trump, again, on the unfavor, are going to change much. Through all this, no matter what, whether he fades off the scope or continues to wage this authoritarian campaign for 2024. So I just think that where we're at is, I think the best way I can explain it is we have a Republican Party that is no longer pro-democracy. It's clearly anti-democratic, in my view, the wing that controls it, which means there's no one to negotiate with. Biden there's not going to be 53 votes, let alone 60 votes for anything in the Senate, I don't think. And that means, I think, that Democrats, my party, has to grow up quite a bit very quickly, because if we cannot compromise with ourselves on infrastructure, reconciliation, all the things that are being discussed this week and next, probably they're going to be pretty important, there's no one else to compromise with. We have to be able, within the different wings of the party, to come to a majority of getting things done somehow, or the Biden agenda is going to fail. And again, there's not a whole lot he can do about it other than to get the Democrats in line, because I don't think there'll be any Republican votes at all.
But do you think it's important to get, let's call it, some Republicans out in the country who voted for Biden, and maybe a few who didn't even, behind it as well? I mean, I was on TV last week and I said, can the Democrats grow their coalition from 51% to 54%, and maybe that's a sort of simple-minded way of thinking about it, but it makes a heck of a lot of difference in the real world, not for 2022, we'll come back to that maybe, but but also in terms of approval and in terms of ability to maneuver, I'd say, with your own coalition, if you're speaking for 54, 56, 57% of the country, or 49, 50, 51, or not, or is that just, are we so polarized?
No, I think that is possible. And I think a lot of the things he's fighting on, whether it's the vaccine mandate, the majority of Americans, regardless of party, and clearly not 51, but whether it's 55 or 56 or higher number, are supportive of that. I think the same with a lot of the infrastructure and other things that are in these bills that we're talking about. There's clearly a majority, including a decent number of Republicans, who support the Biden agenda. Not the progressive Democratic agenda, but the Biden agenda. And that's, again, where I think, I would consider myself a progressive Democrat, but I've been through this enough to know that we cannot hold up. And that's where the party needs to mature, I think, to understand the stakes in this election. If we had two functioning parties and Biden could go try to get 5 or 6 Republicans to be with him, and you could lose 3 or 4 progressive Democrats in the Senate, or another group. I'm just going through it. Hey, that's normal, and the wings of the party can have their fights and their arguments and their debate, and he has a chance to get his agenda through. When you have where we're at, I don't see how that happens if one wing of the Democratic Party is saying my way or the highway, or the moderate wing is. It's not going to work. And by the way, that's exactly what the entire Republican Party is doing right now. And the one thing I'd say is, for progressive Democrats, or the moderate Republicans that are looking at all this and going, oh my God, I have to decide between this authoritarian Republican Party or this this Democratic Party that wants to defund the police or all those kinds of things. The reality is, look, the Democratic Party has wings, but the wing, if there is one that wants to defund the police, is not putting a bill to defund the police and passing it unanimously in the House, or with a big majority in the House. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. None of that stuff is happening. Why? Because we have wings, and the Republican Party used to have wings. It doesn't. It's a party that's been taken over by an extreme authoritarian wing, and the problem that and we're seeing it. We're seeing the impact. Texas abortion ban. The voter suppression bills that are the phony audits that are happening, and now in Pennsylvania is looking at it. That wing has control. So if you're looking at these two parties right now, I think the Democratic Party is having this healthy internal debate amongst itself, out in front of everybody. Which both parties used to have that, but we're so used to Trump can do no wrong, and a media environment on the right that trumpets that he can do no wrong, and the mainstream media doesn't cover things that way. Afghanistan, they're going to call Biden out if they think he made a mistake. If 10 civilians are killed in Afghanistan in an attack, they're gonna, with Trump, you'd be lucky if you saw it, or 2, it would be great he killed somebody. I mean, I don't know what the coverage would be like, but it would be much different. Not the mainstream media, but I'm talking about the right-wing echo chamber. Nothing like that has existed or been built forget about the Democratic Party, but just by pro-democracy groups. That's why I think so many of the different things that have sprung up, like Bulwark, like The Conversation, like Midas Touch. I mean, there's all kinds of different groups out there that didn't exist, but that broad network has to turn into, I think, a broad pro-democracy coalition from Liz Cheney all the way over to AOC that puts democracy first. And then we can go you and I, Bill, can have long debates about marginal tax rates and the things that we used to agree to disagree about.
Yeah, no, and other things too, even some
Yes.
pretty important
Yes.
things.
Yes.
So what does it mean for the Democratic Party to grow up? What does it mean? Obviously, not going to get everything. Some pieces of legislation are going to fail. That's always happens.
Sure.
What matters? I mean, what should we be looking for the next several months? If we come back in summer of 2022 or on the path to the 2022 election, what would your indicators be that the Biden administration's doing well enough? And I take it just from this discussion to be you think the Democratic Party at this point in the Biden administration are joined at the hip. There's no real distinction in terms of success, right? In terms of looking at 2022 or even 2024.
No, I mean, look, we know that the House and Senate in a midterm are directly tied to the incumbent president's approval ratings and how people see the country going. There is no way for the party to succeed, I think, and frankly for the country to succeed unless the Biden agenda succeeds. I mean, I mean the country in terms of our democracy. I mean, but for the party, that means we have to. I think the infrastructure bill has to pass. The reconciliation has to happen. I'm not so worried about was it 3.5 or 2.4 or whatever the number is going to end up being, but it has to happen. The debt ceiling.
Why do you think that's so? I was thinking the other day, making a little list. I mean, it seems to be COVID has to be under control.
Sure.
6-8 months from now. The economy needs to be decent. Do people really care that much? That I mean, I don't know if some bridge is beginning to be built in their district, or they haven't quite gotten to it yet. I mean, well, I'm sort of when you step back, it's a little puzzling how much weight got put on the both infrastructure bill, the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill as sort of core parts of the agenda, or maybe they are really core. Or maybe they're symbolically core. I don't know. Well,
again, I mean, I think the coverage is going to be massive failure. Democrats failed. Biden failed. I agree with you. We're already seeing in the polling numbers. Most people do not remember getting their checks during the early stages of the COVID crisis, or their child tax credits. It's not adhering, accumulating to Biden or the Democrats. There's no real boost from it, and those are all things that happened in their bank account. They got the check, they saw it. I'm with you on whether the bridge that's going to be built in 2026 is gonna do that. I do think the one thing that's going on though is we had, I think, 4 years of pretty incompetent and a bunch of other things, but let's just start with incompetent administration, and Biden has been I think people moved towards him, and we talked about this before in 2019. I thought people were going to move to him because they just wanted a competent president who knew how to get things done. I think that's what is Joe Biden's strength, and I think that these things, the infrastructure bill, reconciliation, the projects involved in that, it's important that he's seen as succeeding at getting something done. And that's why I said I don't really get all hung up on whether it's 3.5 or 2.1. Those are wings in the party having that fight. And then there's the Republican Party wants 0, or maybe it'll be whatever the number is. But basically they want just one thing: see Biden fail. That's what McConnell's said. He's been saying that for quite a while, through a couple of presidents now, except for Trump, even though they're now fighting. A little bit more out in the open with Trump now, hunting around for somebody to take on McConnell, in the leadership. I mean, it's just that's this incoherent kind of party that I think everybody still lacks the imagination of that to understand that we don't live in a two-party system right now. That there's one party that's just hiding the ball and trying to undermine the democracy. And so you saw that, Bill. The CNN poll that had said that 56% of Americans believe that democracy's under attack. You think, that sounds great. 56, gosh, they've come to their sense. 56% think democracy's under attack. The scary numbers in that poll were that only 46% of Democrats think democracy's under attack. Fully 54% of Democrats, having lived through 4 years of Trump, seen January 6th, watched these voter suppression bills being passed, seen Texas abortion ban, DeSantis and Abbott mimicking, and a bunch of Republicans mimicking Trump and trying to be Trump wannabes. They do not see democracy. 54%, majority of Democrats don't see democracy under attack. Republicans, 75% of Republicans, self-identified Republicans, believe democracy's under attack. Why? Well, the 78% who think Joe Biden wasn't fairly elected president, that the election was stolen, of course, you'd have to believe that democracy's under attack. That's why we have to pass these bills. That's why we have to stop these people. So the actual benefactor of all of us worrying about the threat to democracy is Trump and the authoritarian wing of the Republican Party. That message has gotten through to them more than as much as you've raised it, I've raised it, Lincoln Project, other, from across the spectrum, mainstream media, as much as it's been raised, it hasn't registered. And I don't think it's registered with a lot of the press corps. I don't think it's registered with a lot of Democrats in the Senate and the House. That's my point. I mean, I think Joe Manchin is sort of, and maybe even Biden to some extent, still think we can work. There's some party over there. I can get some votes. We can make this work. I don't think that's going to happen.
But they also don't. Yeah, there's a lack of urgency, maybe. I mean, so I guess this gets to the question, really: what does it mean for the Democratic Party to grow up or be more serious for both wings? Right. Because there are some who think too cavalierly that they can just get Susan Collins on some other bill, or they probably can get 10 of them, But then there's the progressives who kind of cavalierly think, well, if we don't get it, doesn't matter. Well, it's important to have the fight and stick to our principles. We'll come back in 2 or 4 or 6 years. And so they each have their own version of not being grown up, from your point of view, I think, of in terms of the necessity to govern successfully, which I guess. So say a little more about that, and what would that mean concretely? I mean, which issues and which, anyway.
No, I mean, we've both been in parties where, Wing was willing to fight on principle and willing to lose an election on it and say, but we're going to make it our point. I mean, Howard Dean. Okay, I ran Howard Dean's campaign. We ran against the war in Iraq, and we started that campaign when 80% of the American people were for the war in Iraq. And by the way, everybody else, John Kerry, Edwards, Gephardt, all of them were for it. We were against it. We got our butts kicked. But I do think that campaign moved the country forward on or at least raised the issue of the war.
And certainly you can make the case that by 2004, whatever Kerry's limitations as a campaigner and so forth, there was the Democratic Party was united and had realized they had to come together to try to defeat Bush. Didn't work, but I mean, it led to Obama, though, arguably, and the 2006 victory and then Obama. That's all good, and it works if there's a democracy in 4 to 6 years. This is why I think this is the problem, right? If AOC and Manchin and the moderates and the progressives do not see, if the number one thing is not to save democracy, then you're going to have these fights about, no, we want 3.5, no, we want, and what I'm saying is I don't believe that's the time we're in. The problem is, how do you get other people, including, then that's what I mean about growing up, can they actually step back for a second, understand? I mean, they watched January 6th. They were in the building. They know what's, they watched 4 years of Trump. Are we really willing to risk that? And not particularly, if again, it's a big
tent party, if we are really are going to be one, then we've got to not only do that, but accept former Republicans into our camp. And maybe it's all a temporary alliance. Okay, I got that. Okay, can we have the temporary alliance? Make sure we stop this authoritarian movement in its tracks. And so, what that means, I think, is just that we are a democracy. It's the same thing we argue about the authoritarian wing of the Republican Party. How is it any wing says, no, we'll crash you on principle, we'll crash you? That's not what democracy is. People coming together. You and I, as much as we disagree on things, could probably solve a lot of, and people like us could actually have some conversations about these things. They need to start doing that within the party and really come to grips with where we're at, I think, because I think a lot of my worry is that a lot of these fights, people are correct about, on both sides could be right about their arguments. I think it's the wrong argument. I think we've got to get to a place where we are. I think voting rights may be far more important than the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, no, I'm struck by, I don't want to obsess about the infrastructure bill, but I've just been thinking about this recently. If it feels to me like if Biden could have a united party and a lot of future former Republicans behind him on really making sure that, the vaccine thing you mentioned, there clearly are national majorities. There are some Republican office holders who are with him on that. So if you made that and getting it to the 5 to 11-year-olds and getting the testing, which they've, in my view, really dropped the ball on in terms of, at home, fast, quick, cheap testing, and make that sort of, okay, that's what really is number one focus. Number two, making sure the economy is sound, and that requires some stimulus, but basically that's probably, frankly, more of a steady as it goes kind of thing. And I don't know, it's funny that I think they've given hostages to fortune in a way by making, maybe it's inevitable. You come in, you want to have a New Deal. There was not that much progress in the last 10 years with the Republican Congress and then with Trump from the liberal point of view. But again, they got the child tax credit. That, I think, is important, really, genuinely as a policy matter, and probably very popular if they could explain it to people. I would actually make a slightly contrarian case that the whole infrastructure thing is making their life more difficult, not easier, because now the whole child tax credit is lost in a maze of, $200 billion for this part of infrastructure and $300 billion for this. And no one I can't follow it. You can't follow it. I don't think we know what's even in that 3.5. And why not just separate it out and say, look, we're going to do COVID, we're going to do the economy, we're going to do child tax credit, we're going to do what we can in a New Deal type way. In addition, as you say, compromise on that. But they've sort of weirdly got themselves in a position where I think maybe you're right. The media is going to say it's a horrible defeat if there's if infrastructure doesn't get through. From the genuine point of view of coming down from Mars and looking at the country, if you had COVID under control in 3 or 4 months, a strong economy and a child tax credit and a smaller infrastructure thing, that'd be pretty impressive in a way, right? So they've I don't know how they've sort of got themselves quite in this situation, but it feels like they've made themselves more hostage to AOC and Manchin than they needed to. I don't know.
Well, I think they are hostage now to getting something done. I mean, again, it's the coverage is just going to be, a complete failure, shocking blow, all that stuff. Much like, by the way, the boosters will happen on September 20th. What they're going to happen to September 27th or something, with everybody over 65, and then probably a month or 6 weeks later, it will be everybody else. But why put yourself in that position? And they have. And I think that's one of the reasons. Afghanistan aside, in terms of, because I have different feelings about that. But Afghanistan aside, I think a lot of these have been self-inflicted in terms of just, again, setting the goal, the marker, and then not getting it done is when you've been selling competence and and his best prepared president ever kind of thing. I think that matters and can matter. And again, it works against us, I think in 2022 because if this election is about democracy, about all of us coming together to get something done for the country, make lives better, I think that's the kind of turf we want to be fighting on. I don't think we want to be fighting about. I'm talking about from Democrats or people on the who sense the real danger here to democracy itself, and picking the fights, like you said, on things like COVID. I mean, laying the markers down now that we're going to be fighting over in 2022, not is he competent? How come Democrats can't get anything? They didn't do anything for 3 years. All they did was fight. Their two wings fought. I don't think that's a recipe for success in 2022. I think being there on COVID, passing an infrastructure bill. By the way, and this is the whole problem. Pass an infrastructure bill. It's like we're not talking about. It's when you get these fights about within the party about how much or what's in it, and there's certainly things that everybody in the party could agree should be in there. And let the Republicans vote them down, and explain why they were against, whether child tax credit or whatever. And I do agree with you, though, Bill, that the other thing is there's so many different things that are in these bills, that things like the child tax credit or other benefits that people really are receiving because of the administration and what Democrats have fought for, no one knows it. I mean, you can't. No one's explained it to them. There's been no solid messaging. Again, part of this is because you set up. Trump used to distract in other ways, but they tend to distract by what's the next thing we're going to set a goal for that we may not make. That's going to make you forget that we did this for you yesterday, or help make you forget, or help you forget. So I am very worried about 2022, and particularly the House. And it is going to be tied to Biden's approval rate. I don't think there's any way we have a chance as a party, and I'm talking about as a Democrat now. To succeed in the 2022 elections if Biden's agenda is not, and Biden himself, his presidency is not successful or seen as successful by them. There's plenty of things you point out that could do it. COVID could be, we could come out of COVID, the vaccines, boosters, et cetera. The economy could be moving. We've got plenty of time for all those things to happen. Of course, there could be a variant, another Delta variant that's not in his control. But like you said, they get credit. The problem gets worse. He's going to take a hit for it, and so will Democrats. Does that force people back into thinking, yeah, Trump was great? Let's resurrect the Trump party. I sure hope not. But
it is striking. I mean, this gets to the real core. Whatever we hope and think should be the case, the core political strategic question, which is so there's the Biden side of it, the positive side. It has to be a reasonably successful administration, look like it, so voters are willing to say, yeah, let's continue to give them a House or a Senate that helps them govern in the general direction they're going. But then there's the other side of it, which is how much could they disqualify the Republican Party? I would say whatever you and I think should be the case, it's been striking that has not really been from what one can tell from off-year elections, Democrats are doing okay, they're doing fine, and most recently in California. On the other, they're not clobbering Republicans, and people aren't, I live here in Virginia, people aren't looking at Glenn Youngkin and saying, I think McCullough's probably going to win, but I wouldn't say that Youngkin's being disqualified for having gone along with some ridiculous, in my view, election fraud stuff and being very, two-faced on the vaccines and so forth. And so is there more of a way to hang the crazier Republicans around the whole party's neck, or is that just not working at off-year election because people just aren't scared of a Republican Party that won't have the presidency, or are they missing an opportunities here? What's your general take on the Republican, on the how good a job are the Democrats doing in painting the Republicans in a certain way?
I think that the one, that's not going to move around a lot either because of the polarization. But I think there's clearly, I think, in the midterm, or so far in the off years, been real signs that at the edges, 3 points here, 4 points there, it is possible to paint a Republican as a Trump who's exhibiting the either authoritarian or other things that are sort of Trump wannabe candidates out there. Elder showed that the more he moved in that direction, I think that's what helped Newsom at the end. It gets California, so I'm not taking much out of that. But I do think in Virginia and some of these other states, that 2 point or 3 points of having a candidate who's coming out of the authoritarian Trump wing or the MAGA wing, whatever you want to call it, of the party, is going to give a Tim Ryan, for example, in Ohio, a shot. I don't mean that Tim is going to win, but he's got a much better shot, I think, if that's the contrast.
Yeah, I was struck by the Newsom Elder stuff in California. That was going to always be probably a win for Newsom, a defeat of recall, unless they just blew up on the Democratic side. But it could have easily been 15 points, not 23 or whatever it's going to end up here. And that was because Elder. So it's two things. It seems to me it's interesting. They defined it as a choice between Newsom and Elder. You didn't get to be a moderate Republican who hoped that Kevin Faulconer, the mayor of San Diego, was going to be the alternative, and therefore, if you went to the polls and you were in between, you were a moderate, you were even a former Republican type, you thought, "Oof, my God, I better do the safe thing." Now, you don't quite have the chance to do that in a normal election quite as much, though you do, depending on who the nominee is. The other thing is the internal dynamics of the Republican Party produced Elder as the alternative. That wasn't Newsom didn't invent that. There were actual polls showing, which is what happened, incidentally, that 80% of the Republicans or something were going to vote for Larry Elder, not for the more respectable one, which does get to be, so then how much does it matter who the actual nominees are in each party?
It matters. I mean, I think it's really going to matter. I mean, I think you need sort of three things, I think. Biden doing, seen as success, as competent and successful. I don't think the approval ratings are going to go up a whole lot, but lift them a little bit. I think there's all kinds. There's no sign. I don't see any signs that anywhere that these Republican primaries are going to produce moderate Republican. And I don't. Even Liz Cheney style conservative Republicans who are against authoritarianism think there was no steal, and that's not going to happen. All these candidates, Larry Elder, example of it, are moving to J.D. Vance in Ohio, moving to out-Trump their primary opponents. So I think but we need that. I mean, I'm talking as a Democrat. If you care about democracy, I think we have a much better shot. I think there are a lot of Republican women, young Republicans. There are groups of Republicans and independents that I think do not want that would vote for an acceptable Democrat before they would vote for a Republican from that was emanating from that wing. Gets to the Democrat. Doug Jones in 2017, Connor Lamb, moderate. Doug's pretty progressive, but he's moderate Southern Democrat. He didn't have a primary, and Connor Lamb didn't have a primary.
I forgot that Doug didn't have it. So he didn't have, in 2017 when that was the Sessions seat. It was a special election because he had resigned to become Attorney General, obviously. Yeah, that's so Roy Moore won that insane Republican primary.
Right.
But they were able to, and you ran the Jones campaign, so they were able to arrange things to not to have a progressive challenge.
Yeah, we didn't have that. And so I think, our primaries are going to decide a lot about whether give the first two facts I gave you. The first, Biden's doing relatively stable and well. They nominate somebody out of the Trump MAGA wing. and we're going to have primaries between the progressive wing and others. In 2018, it was the moderates in the party who won a majority of those primaries, and then went on to take the House back, to win the majority. I think, again, you saw it in New York City with the primary there. The Democratic first round and then the runoff. That I think the Democratic Party, I think, is growing. I actually think it's coming into understanding, at least at the rank and file level, citizen level, what's at stake here, and they, we'll see what happens. But yeah, we have to nominate the right, acceptable.
So that's the third pillar.
Does,
if the first is Biden, the second is what the GOP looks like, the third is what the Democratic Party looks like.
Yeah, I don't think, we in most of these marginal districts or battleground districts, I think a Trump MAGA candidate versus a Connor Lamb style Democrat, we're going to win those seats. I really do believe that. I think if we, and look, there's plenty of room for AOCs in the party and for Connor Lambs. She does a great job of representing her district. Connor Lamb, he's now running for the Senate, but he represented his. We've got to nominate people who can represent their district and have the big tent party, because there are not two tents anymore. That's the real problem here.
I mean, so do you think the party leaders are almost behind the rank and file in seeing this, or do you think they're going to weigh in a lot of these Senate, but especially some House primaries and a lot of redistricted seats and open seats to try to get acceptable numbers? I would say my own conversations with pretty senior people in the Democratic Party and the Biden White House and on the Hill, they're not unfriendly to this idea. Quite the contrary, they're not foolish. They understand that having a lot more Spanbergers and Lurias will help us in those kinds of districts, and there are a lot of those kinds of districts. On the other hand, I don't know that they feel exactly a sense of urgency about making sure that they end up with nominees like that. And just the second point I would make then is, when I've suggested, talked to a few of them about, well, could you get actual former Republicans to run in one or two places, even if they're, almost symbolically what it would show, people coming over there again, that would be great. It's like, well, that would be great, but maybe someone needs to make that happen a little more than just saying it would be nice if it happened spontaneously. And I kind of feel like they're not quite, well, again, it gets to the question. I mean, they don't maybe have the sense of urgency about getting from a 51% to 54% party as much as they might. Or maybe I'm being a little unfair and it's happening behind the scenes. And No,
I don't think. Look, I think most of it's not just the Democratic committees in Washington, are always lagging behind where people out there are. And I think, and frankly, my own experience has been when they get involved and try to play in primaries, they always tend to make the wrong choice.
That's another problem.
That's another thing. So I think it's more likely to happen. Again, natural. I think there will be candidates out there that the rank and file will move to. Like I said, if you look at New York City as a good example, here's a really progressive liberal city. There were plenty of people that you would have picked, who were going to end up, or were talked about as who was going to be the next mayor. The current elected mayor, or will be, has he been sworn in yet? I don't know the answer to that question.
De Blasio's still mayor until January 1st, I think.
January 1st. But I'm saying he's, it's not somebody anybody was talking about. That's James.
Adams.
Adams. Yeah, that's what I mean. No, my point is, I think you're seeing that. I'm seeing that the party in the districts is trying to nominate and find candidates that will, and not the when I mean not the Washington party, I talk about people in their district are out there pretty out there organizing, trying to recruit candidates on their own. They're not relying on Washington right now. And by the way, Washington didn't have a great run. The Washington Democratic crowd didn't have a great run in 2020. I mean, forget about the polling and all the other stuff, but we all talked about how many Senate seats there was going to be pickup of this or that. They all played. They played. The committees played. They nominated. They made sure they had the right candidates. And guess what happened? We didn't. We didn't gain anything. In fact, except for Georgia, which I think Stacey Abrams and a whole lot of, again, makes my point, people on the ground in these states and in the districts, I think that's what's going to make the difference. That's what's going to make the difference in 2022. And I also think the other thing I'm seeing is on the ground, there are Bill Kristol's and Joe Trippis that are in their district working to find a candidate that they can all get behind. And that may be a Republican bill, in the right district.
No, it's interesting. And that would be hope. Yeah. Now, I have a little. So I'll tell one little anecdote that might confirm this. I think on TV at the end of the week, so Gonzalez announced he wasn't going to run again in Ohio. Anthony Gonzalez, who had voted to impeach Trump, quite a conservative Republican. And I said, semi-cavalierly, but fairly seriously on TV, the Democrats could do worse than in Ohio 16 than just to approach Gonzalez and say, why don't you run as a Democrat? I mean, you're more conservative than a lot of us, but you're a decent person. You believe in democracy. It's a Republican district. If they nominate a normal Democrat who just comes up through the ranks, they're not going to win. So what's to lose? I mean, you end up with a slightly bigger Democratic party. The House might come down to one or two, and he's going to vote for the Democrat for Speaker. That's the one thing you would, I think, insist on.
Yeah.
And then, and why not? And I would say, so someone else on the show said, oh, come on, he's much too conservative to be a Democrat. And other people in Washington were like, oh, well, that's a cute idea, but it can't really work. Actually, I got emails from people in the district saying, that's an interesting idea. Do you think he would do it? And I maybe, these are sort of semi-prominent people in Ohio. And so it does feel to me like, in a way, the voters and the maybe local political types, some of them, are ahead of, look what happened in Cleveland, in Ohio 11, speaking of another race, are sort of ahead of the D.C. people and thinking we need to win these races, and it means taking some people who aren't quite where we are, and a couple. The other point I'll just make, and then I want you to talk, obviously, is I also think it's from an image of the party as a whole point of view, it's important. That is to say, it's not just that, yes, you might pick up a district if in Illinois to move across the border from Ohio, if Kinzinger switched parties and ran as a Democrat in Sherry Bustos' open seat, it's now an open seat there, if the Democrats sort of arranged to give him at least a good chance of winning that nomination, I think he'd probably win as a Democrat. Maybe it would be a Democratic seat anyway, I don't even know. But nationally, there'd be a little bit of a ripple effect. It's like, whoa. The Democratic Party isn't just a bunch of progressives, who get all 90% of the press coverage, and then Biden, kind of, who's a senior citizen, holding him back a little. They're actual people on the ground in Ohio and Illinois and elsewhere who are trying to broaden the tent of the Democratic Party. I think it would have an effect on voters not in Illinois if they saw that there was a sort of a recruiting of and actual nominating of Adam Kinzinger to be the congressional candidate. It's only one district, I understand. But anyway, I just wonder if you think there's any,
Well, that is part of the growing up, becoming not just saying we're a big tent party, but actually inviting, and I meant it. It's not, first, moderates and progressive Democrats have to figure out, we've got to come together and get things done. But I said, invite former Republicans into the tent too. How that but I think if that happens, it's going to happen locally, is what I'm saying, in the district. I don't think it'll be, maybe some of the Washington folks will do that. But I actually think it won't work unless it actually comes from in the district anyway. And then it's in terms of the people on the ground, who Republican and Democrat coming together saying, hey, let's talk, let's get behind Kinzinger or whoever it is that we're talking about, more likely.
And do you agree? It wouldn't take that much. That's the other thing I would say. I mean, that is, of course, 90% of these races have incumbents, and they have people who are going to be the nominees. So it's not like those are going to change. But on the margin, a few like that seems to me could change the look of 2022.
Well, I think that's the weird thing about where we're at. I think you've got a bunch of, as we talked about the CNN numbers, about people who understand or believe that democracy's under attack. But what do those 54% of Democrats and the independents out there who don't believe democracy's under attack want? Well, what they want is two parties that work there, parties that work together, disagree, have debate, get things done. And so that's why a lot of times I think what the other, maybe a fourth ingredient is, look, that's a message for the Democratic candidate or the independent candidate or the Republican candidate to drive through. But there's still a need for somebody to be saying, we know these guys, you can't vote for them. Our democracy, I'm telling you, our democracy's under attack here. Because I think it's those two things. We have to have acceptable, but we have to make sure people are alarmed at what would happen if they get the majority, or God forbid, the presidency. Trump or a authoritarian wing member becomes president in 2024.
Any particular, I want to come back to Biden in a minute, but any particular states or districts or races you're sort of looking at as a bit of a indicator in the primaries in 2022, for example, or even the general election in 2021 as to how things are shaking out, and is there a moment where everyone looks up and says, well, the Republican Party, you might hope that not an anti-Trump, but a not so fully Trumpy Republican is going to win the nomination in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and so forth. But no, it's not going to happen. Or could it happen? I mean, when do you think we sort of have a real sense? When does that shake out? Summer of 2022, I guess? I mean...
Yeah, I think summer, but I also think that one of the things that we sort of hit on in California and Elder and Newsom was how hard the lean in on COVID was. Mm-hmm. And I'm really struck by what we're starting to see in Texas. And so I actually think we may be surprised by which primaries or races actually define what's going to be important about 2022 and whether a state's in play or not. I wouldn't put Texas out of play at all. And whether COVID, in Abbott and the whole and the economy down there and everything that's going on, it may have a much bigger impact on putting that state in play. I think Ohio could be another, depending on who gets. And again, this gets down to who gets nominated, those kinds of things. I don't know. We'll know that, but I'm actually starting to think Texas could be a bit surprising politically in 2022.
Yeah, no, that sounds. I've had that thought too, but I do think the COVID thing is. These things are so unpredictable, right? I mean, the degree of anti-vaccine sentiment and of catering to it by the well-known Republican office holders, leave aside Trump or various people running for office. I mean, Josh Mandel's burning masks in his ads, but we have the Republican governors of the two largest states that have Republican governors, Texas and Florida. Pretty hard to say that that's not the mainstream of the party. I mean, they're the two most. Yeah. They're governing the most citizens of the U.S. As Republicans. Right. And so I wonder how much that the COVID comes back as an issue, and then, of course, other things. On Biden, I'm struck, someone made a good point to me over the weekend. I was saying he's moderate. It's kind of crazy how successful the Republicans have been in defining the Democratic Party as being run by progressives. I think that is, or by AOC and the squad or something. And I think that's one just kind of weird, that's a problem that can be handled somewhat of a media thing. But the other thing is the competency. You mentioned that earlier, but I'd like you to talk about that more because, I mean, if you came down from Mars and looked at Jimmy Carter in the late 70s, I mean, he was a very moderate Democrat from Georgia and so forth, and you would have said, well, he's the strongest Democrat you could have, and it's, But you know what? If people just don't think the administration's up to it, the ideology becomes less important, right? And so you could have said, if you came to FMRS, he defeated the Kennedy people, so he showed he's even more of a moderate. But you know what? At the end of the day, people just weren't going to reelect him, right? I mean, and so I guess with Biden, it's occurred to me occasionally, what if I guess it comes back to this is where Afghanistan and other little things that aren't ideological exactly do matter. Well, I mean, it is ideological, but the judgment of him on Afghanistan, whatever you think of like getting out or not getting out, the seeming lack of, planning and just carefulness in the execution. And I would say the same is true in other areas too. It's why I think on COVID, they really need to sort of just make that work as much as they can. And where even little mixed signals, which aren't important, if Biden says I want to have the booster and then it doesn't happen, who cares? It doesn't matter really, probably in terms of the actual policy that much, whether it's a month from now or not. And maybe it's good that the FDA is not taking orders from Biden, but the sense of a little disarray, I think, can be, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they could pay an outsized price for that, I think.
Well, I think, one, that's true, but two, it's what's fascinating to me is that is again going back to those democracy under attack numbers. Somebody has succeeded at getting 78% of Republicans to think that the election was stolen, and 75% to think democracy's under attack, while only 46% of Democrats think democracy under attack. It was not that hard to figure out. Why are they so good at painting Biden and the Democrats as the progressive socialist? Well, it's the same echo chamber and right-wing media. And what I'm saying, we that has never been created. And I'm not talking in a partisan sense. I'm just talking about there's no one out there saying Joe Biden can do no wrong, his way, and by the way, if you don't, we want you out of the party. That's not happening. So a lot of this coverage is actually healthy. I mean, in terms of calling it, but that plus that echo chamber that is succeeding on the disinformation on the election, succeeding at projecting themselves as the victims of the threat to democracy, is pretty powerful. And I don't think, and I think Biden, I think the fact that he's Joe Biden is why he's still where he's at, because I think there would have been several people we could have nominated who would be president today that it would absolutely have just imploded their presidency on some of this stuff. I don't think that's happening to Joe Biden. I still think people give him the benefit of the doubt. I think the real issue now is how broad-based a pro-democracy coalition is out there that can be put together, that can start to put the media network of people together that can move a message in the opposite, a pro-democracy message, that as the administration succeeds, as is a good recruit who's running an X district, I mean, that is clearly there and pushing back, because otherwise it's like fighting with two hands behind your back. When I did the Jones campaign in 2020, Jones could say, look, that's what I'm saying. Rational people in both parties, and there still are plenty, want somebody who can disagree without being disagreeable, work across party lines, actually try to have a serious debate about where the country needs to go on an issue and come to some compromise. That's what they want. Particularly a lot of the Republican women, I think, that are leaking out of the Republican Party right now and would come across. What we didn't have is, so so that person, Doug Jones or whoever that candidate is, Conor Land, he or she hurts themselves when they attack the other party as authoritarian or as it actually pressures those people back. So what we really needed was somebody to say, I know Tommy Tuberville, we worked with Tommy Tuberville, you don't want to do this. I mean, that wasn't us. And that for a lot of reasons didn't materialize. And by the way, I don't think we would have won if it had. So, but I'm just saying, at some level, I think Biden can do what he needs to do. I think hopefully the Democrats, put enough, like in 2018, put enough candidates out there who are strong in their district, reflect the district. I still think the one thing is who the Republicans nominate, and if they nominate a Trump sort of authoritarian MAGA candidate, that there is enough of an echo chamber that we've all created that says we know these people, don't do it. I mean, all those sort of pieces have to be in play. And I'm, for one, somebody who definitely believes we need two strong, thoughtful political parties in this country, and would hope that some Republicans emerge that can build that again. But for right now, I just don't see it. I mean, you're right. There may be one in this district that we could all, and try to, but it's just not within the base of the party right now as it's constituted, with Trump pushing for that to occur, I don't think.
And maybe that'll become evident just because of who wins the nominations. I think that's one thing people are underestimating when they look, and this is why this has been, you do think dynamically, and that's why you're a good strategist, and I think this is why this conversation for me has been very useful and thought-provoking, because people look at the status quo and they look at the next month or two infrastructure, and they think, okay, this is what's going to drive 2022. They're going to be a heck of a lot of high-profile primaries in both parties, and the parties are going to look different by the end of those, by Labor Day 2022, than they do today, or maybe they won't. But I mean, that's the question, right? And so some of it does happen organic. I think your point that it could happen more bottom up than top down is very important. The defund the police thing was effective, I think, in the House races in 2020.
Oh yeah,
it wasn't very effective against Biden, but it was effective down ballot.
Right.
There was no one terribly coordinated effort, I wouldn't say, to take that on. But I do think by now that's faded, because enough House and Senate Democrats and Biden in power have just not had any interest in that and said that's ridiculous. And in fact, we want to fund the police more because these reckless Republicans are cutting funding, blah, 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 blah. So, I mean, these things can sort of, you don't need some mastermind to be playing all the chess game here, right? Some of it can happen sort of spontaneously.
Yeah, and also things can, look, Afghanistan, we today we can think what we think about Afghanistan.
Right.
Let's see what everybody really thinks about it 6 to 8 months from now. And I don't mean that they'll forget about it, I mean, which is probably what will happen. But it may be seen in a completely different light. They ended up getting 200,000 people out. I mean, whatever, whatever, I'm just saying. So I just think that there are plenty of things, COVID and others, that I do see as possible in the economy to come out within the next, between now and November of next year, in a way that clearly benefits Biden and the Democrats. I think I see no sign that the Republicans will moderate and not nominate sort of caricature kind of candidates out there who, like you said, you get 8 or 9 or 10 of those, who are out there and saying something 1 week and the other one doing something, crazy the next week. And we did sort of see this in the past, where the Tea Party had that horrible year where they cost seats to the Republicans. That can help define the party that a lot of people don't want in power. So we'll
But
we'll
as you
see.
say, I guess having the White House makes it unlike 2018. I mean, just it puts a big thing in front of people, which is Biden, and that bridge has to be crossed first, I suppose.
Sure.
Biden is doing acceptably well maybe that's one way to think about 2022. Once you cross that bridge, or once you're halfway, 2/3 across that bridge, then you can say, well, how do these two parties look, incidentally? And the Republicans either look crazy or don't look so crazy. Democrats either look like they want to defund the police or don't look like they want to defund the police. And that becomes maybe on the margin very important. But you do need sort of that baseline of an adequately performing Democratic administration, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, even if that's the case, in the midterm, it usually turns out to be a very bad year for the party that has the presidency. So even if he is seen as favorable approval numbers are up and things are moving and people feel give him good approval on the economy and COVID. One, we got to have that just to have a shot. And even if that though happens. Normally, you would say, forget it. They're going to lose. They're going to lose the House, at least, if not lose Senate seats too. And I think the thing that mitigates against that is where the Republican Party is right now, and who they may nominate, and whether the Democratic Party is mature enough to understand that we've got to be a democracy in our party in terms of finding common ground and inviting Republicans in. And if we do that, those three things all have to happen. And even then, it is a big mountain to climb, given things we haven't talked about: reapportionment, redrawing the lines, the voter suppression stuff that's out there. It's going to be all hands on deck.
Oh, that's a great summary and a chastening one, but very but interesting also in the sense that there are more moving parts than I think some of the conventional wisdom has it, and also it's particularly the notion that a lot of stuff could happen in the states and in the districts ground up, and that things could look quite different in addition to the real world, obviously, in terms of policies and stuff. Joe, anything else you want to tell people to either watch out for, or one last word for Joe Biden or Ron Klain or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer if they're watching this?
No, I think we've covered.
No, I think the idea that the party needs to be more serious. That's a very, more kind of grown up in a certain way is a very interesting one. Yeah.
Can I plug my podcast?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look.
Then we can always cut this out of the.
Yeah. Now look. My podcast, That Trippi Show. If I put out about once a week, and if you thought this was interesting or want to hear more, I hope you guys all listen in.
You absolutely should. And Joe, thanks for taking a break from that and all the other stuff you're doing to join me on Conversations today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill. It's always great to be on.
And thank you all for joining me and Joe on Conversations.